by death's wounds and fatigue, and we were totally surrounded with such an incessant fire as it's impossible to conceive. Lieutenant John Barker.
At the end of the day, the British troops reached the safety of the Charlestown Peninsula, just above Boston. 73 of their fellows had been killed. The struggle for America had begun. It would not end before involving all the greatest military powers in the world in a global war.
The American Revolution was the most important event in American history. It not only legally created the nation in 1776, but it infused into our culture all of our noblest ideals, our highest aspirations, our belief in equality, our belief in liberty, our belief in the happiness of ordinary people, our belief in constitutionalism. All of these things came out of the Revolution.
These are the things that we still stand for today. We, the strange mix of folks who ended up calling ourselves Americans. And we qualify everything that we do and all the relationships that we have domestically and in terms of our foreign policy on those ideals that came out so very clearly as we started into the war of our independence.
So many aspects of what Americans are today can be seen here in this revolution. Our tendency to go wildly optimistic about things and go flying off in all directions. We love liberty, but we also love authority. We fought to free everybody in America, but we still had a lot of slaves, which it took us another 100 years to solve. Our ability to come back from incredible discouragements and finally win the last battle. All these things, all these composites of America are here in this revolutionary experience. And it's also a great story. It's a great drama.
What do we mean by the revolution? The war? That was no part of the revolution. It was only an effect and consequence of it. The revolution was in the minds of the people. And this was effected from 1760 to 1775 in the course of 15 years before a drop of blood was drawn at Lexington. John Adams.
In the decades before the War of Independence began, the 80% of the American colonists who were white enjoyed standards of freedom and prosperity nearly unequaled anywhere else on Earth. The riches of a vast, untamed continent were theirs for the taking.
We can't look at America today and even begin to imagine what it was like then. First of all, there were only 2.5 million people, spread all the way from Maine to Florida, and they were all close to the ocean. There were 4 cities that had a population of over 10,000. The rivers themselves were obstacles to movement on the land. There was no bridge across any major river. The rivers were highways leading from the ocean inland, but obstacles to movement if you wanted to go from one colony to another colony. It was wooded. A squirrel could have traveled to every acre in the 13 colonies and have never touched ground, just going from tree to tree to tree.
The colonists saw themselves as the freest people in the world, living in the kind of society envisioned by 18th century philosophers. Land was cheap, it was available, society was fluid, the social ladder was short, but it was shaky too.
Wealth was accessible through hard work and perseverance, and wealth was the key to movement up that social ladder. For over 3 decades, beginning in 1732, a self-made Philadelphia printer and writer named Benjamin Franklin reflected that colonial attitude in his popular magazine, Poor Richard's Almanac.
Industry pays debts, while despair increases them. God helps those that help themselves. There are no gains without pains. Ben Franklin.
Theirs was the age of enlightenment, and the ideas of great minds, guided by reason, dominated thought in Europe. Nearly 70% of the colonists were English or of English descent, and they looked to England, the strongest nation on earth, for cultural, social, and political direction.
The temper and character which prevail in our colonies are, I am afraid, unalterable by any human art. An Englishman is the unfittest person on earth to argue another Englishman into slavery. Edmund Burke, English statesman.
Yet true slavery was an undeniable fact of colonial life. Although concentrated in the South, where the principal crop was labor-intensive tobacco, slavery was practiced throughout the colonies, and slaves were a part of the shipping industry that dominated New England.
Ships would take rum from Massachusetts to London. They would drop down to Africa, pick up slaves, and take them across to the West Indies, where they dumped the slaves. They picked up molasses and brought that molasses up to New England, where it would be used to distill rum. They then picked up rum, and the cycle started again.
By 1750, Massachusetts exported more than 2 million gallons of rum a year. But rum wasn't the only Massachusetts export influenced by slavery.
This is good old Boston, the home of the bean and the cod. The bean was the Boston bean, which was grown to feed the slaves in the West Indies. And the Boston merchants are heavily involved in exporting beans, dried fish, timber, all sorts of things which the West Indies need for their survival.
To their west, the colonists found a howling frontier, a place of constant conflict with America's first possessors, the Indians. And in 1754, 2 decades before the start of the American Revolution, that frontier became the battleground for a full-scale conflict known as the French and Indian War. In the mid-1700s, the rich and wild Ohio River country became an area of dispute between the French, who were the possessors of Canada, the British, who were the possessors of colonies along the East Coast, and Native American groups.
One of the reasons why the colonists, the American colonists, clung to the British during most of the time that they were here in North America was this fear of French encroachment with the help of the Indians.
The British sent an eager but untried, strapping 21-year-old major from Virginia into the central Pennsylvania wilderness in 1754 to tell the French that they were invading British lands. His name was George Washington, and his regiment, along with a group of British sympathizing Indians led by a warrior named Half King, fired the shots that led to the outbreak of war.
I heard the bullets whistle, and believe me, there is something charming in the sound. George Washington, 1754.
The Virginians discharge a volley or two, rush into the camp. The French, those who were not wounded or killed instantly, try to run out of the camp, but Half King and his warriors are on the backside of the camp, So everyone is captured or killed except for